When I opened that small, crumpled piece of paper, I never imagined those 5 words scribbled by my daughter would change everything. Pretend to be sick and leave. I looked at her confused, and she just shook her head frantically, begging me to believe her. It was only later that I found out why. But before we continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. The morning had started like any other in our house on the outskirts of Chicago. It had been just over 2 years since I married Richard, a successful businessman I met after my divorce. Our life seemed perfect in everyone's eyes. A comfortable house, money in the bank, and my daughter Sarah finally had the stability she needed so much. Sarah was always an observant child, too quiet for her 14 years. She seemed to absorb everything around her like a sponge. At first, her relationship with Richard was difficult, as expected from any teenager dealing with a stepfather, but over time they seemed to have found a balance. Or at least that's what I told myself to sleep better at night. That Saturday morning, Richard had invited his partners for brunch at our house. It was an important event. They were planning to discuss a massive company expansion, and Richard was unusually tense about it. He wanted everything to be perfect. I spent the whole week preparing, polishing the silverware, ironing the napkins, making sure the house looked like a magazine spread. I was in the kitchen finishing the salad when Sarah appeared. She looked pale, nervous.
"Mom," she whispered, glancing toward the living room where Richard was on the phone.
"Please, can we talk for a second?" Before I could answer, Richard called out, "Sarah, set the table, would you?" His voice was calm but sharp, the kind of tone that didn't invite questions. Sarah hesitated, her eyes meeting mine. Something in her expression, fear mixed with urgency, made my stomach tighten. When guests began arriving, laughter and chatter filled the room. Everything looked picture perfect, but beneath it all something felt wrong, and I was about to find out just how wrong. I kept watching Sarah as the guests settled in. She was helping carry plates and refill glasses, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, then toward Richard. I could tell she was counting the minutes. Something had her terrified, but I couldn't understand what it could be. Richard's business partners, 2 men named Greg and Thomas, sat across from me at the long oak table. They were friendly enough, talking about profits and new buildings, but Richard's charm felt hollow. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and every time I spoke, he placed a hand on my arm just a little too firmly, as if reminding me to stay quiet. It wasn't new behavior. Since we'd married, Richard had slowly taken control of everything, the finances, the house, even my schedule. It started with helping and organizing, but turned into control so subtly I barely noticed. My friends drifted away. My phone calls became shorter, and when I tried to bring it up, he always had the same response. "You're overthinking, Evelyn. I'm protecting our family." As the conversation at the table continued, I smiled and nodded, trying to keep up appearances. But that note burned in my pocket like a warning siren. I could feel Sarah's fear echoing in my own chest. "Evelyn," Richard said suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Would you pour more wine for Greg?" I reached for the bottle, my hand slightly trembling. As I poured, I caught Sarah's reflection in the glass cabinet behind him. She was standing perfectly still, her face pale as paper. The look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. Sheer dread. After brunch, when the men moved to the living room to smoke cigars and talk numbers, I excused myself to check on dessert. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding. Sarah followed a few seconds later, quietly closing the door behind her. "Mom," she whispered, "please, you need to listen to me. Pretend you're sick. Leave. Don't drink anything he gives you." My stomach dropped. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Tears filled her eyes. "I heard him last night," she said, voice breaking. "He was on the phone with someone. He said you don't deserve the money from Grandpa's house. He said once you're gone, everything's his. Mom, I think he's going to do something to you today." I stared at her, unable to breathe for a second. Richard's controlling behavior, his sudden generosity, the locked desk drawers, all the small things I had ignored, suddenly made terrible sense. "Sarah," I whispered, gripping her hand. "Are you sure?" She nodded quickly. He told the men coming today that it would all be finalized by tonight. I don't know what that means, but please, just leave. Before I could respond, we both heard footsteps approaching. Richard's voice came from the hallway. Calm, polite, too smooth. Evelyn, dessert ready, darling? Sarah backed away, whispering, Please, go. Now. I forced a weak smile and walked back toward the table. I think I'm feeling a little dizzy, I said softly, pressing a hand to my head. Maybe I should lie down for a bit. Richard's smile didn't falter, but I saw his jaw tighten. Of course, dear, he said, standing up. Let me help you, but I stepped back quickly. No, I'll be fine. Just need some rest. As I walked upstairs, my knees trembling, I could feel his eyes on my back. I didn't know if I'd just saved my life or put myself in even greater danger. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat reminding me that my own husband might be plotting something unspeakable. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to piece it all together. Could it really be true? Could Richard, the man who promised to protect me, who smiled at me across candlelit dinners, be planning to kill me? I tried to calm my breathing, but panic clawed at my chest. I needed to think. I needed to move. I quietly walked to the window and peeked outside. Down below, I could see the men laughing by the patio, cigars glowing like small embers in the gray afternoon light. Richard was among them, smiling, gesturing confidently, as if nothing was wrong. I wanted to run. Grab my purse, take Sarah, and leave. But the moment I reached for my bag, I heard a faint creak from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer to my room. I froze. The doorknob turned slightly. Once, twice, then stopped. Silence. Then Richard's voice, calm and honey smooth, drifted through the door. Evelyn, sweetheart, are you okay? Should I bring you some tea? Tea. The word sent a chill through me. Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Don't drink anything he gives you. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to sound steady. No, I'll be fine, Richard. Just need to lie down. He paused for a few seconds that felt like forever, then said softly, All right. Rest well, darling. His footsteps faded away. For a moment, I just stood there listening. Then I tiptoed to the dresser, pulled out my phone, and texted Sarah, Stay in your room. Don't eat or drink anything. We'll talk soon. I needed proof. Evidence. Because if I was right, I couldn't just run. I had to make sure he never got another chance to hurt us. I searched the drawers, my eyes scanning for anything strange. In the bottom of his nightstand, hidden beneath documents and old receipts, I found a small brown envelope. Inside, a life insurance policy, my name, Richard as the sole beneficiary, dated just a month ago. That was the moment my fear turned into something sharper, cold, furious clarity. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands trembling. Then I crept back to the door, listening. The men were still downstairs. I could hear faint laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. Richard's voice, confident, relaxed. He had no idea I knew. I slipped out of the room, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I needed to find Sarah. But first, I wanted to hear what they were saying. I moved down the hallway, stopping near the top of the staircase. Tonight, one of the men said. You sure you can pull this off without a mess? Richard chuckled quietly. She's fragile. It won't take much. Just a few drops. And by morning, everyone will think it was her heart. My body went cold. I stepped back, nearly gasping, and clutched the banister to steady myself. If you're still watching, take a deep breath, because from this point on, things got darker than I could have ever imagined. I had to protect my daughter. And the only way to do that was to outsmart the man I once loved. So I started planning my own game. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak and whisper of the house. Down the hall, Sarah's light was still on, and I could picture her curled up under the blanket, waiting for morning. I wanted to go to her, hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but I didn't want to risk Richard hearing us. At 2 a.m., I heard his footsteps again. Slow, purposeful. They stopped outside my door. The knob turned slightly and the door creaked open. I shut my eyes, breathing evenly, pretending to be asleep. I could feel him standing there, watching me. Seconds passed like minutes. Then I heard it, the faint clink of porcelain. A cup being placed on my nightstand. "Here," he whispered. "This will help you sleep." The smell of chamomile filled the air, but there was something else beneath it. Something metallic. I stayed still until he left. Then I opened my eyes. The tea sat there, steaming quietly in the moonlight. I reached for my phone and took a photo of it. Then I carefully carried the cup to the bathroom, poured it into a clear glass, and sealed it with plastic wrap. Evidence. By morning, my decision was made. I wasn't going to run anymore. I was going to end this. When the sun came up, I called an old friend, Detective Harris. We'd gone to school together decades ago, and though we hadn't spoken in years, he still owed me a favor. I told him everything. The note, the tea, the insurance papers, the overheard conversation. He didn't hesitate. "Don't confront him," he warned. "Let me set something up. I'll come by tonight. Pretend to be an old neighbor. We'll catch him in the act." All day, I went through the motions like nothing was wrong. Richard kissed my cheek before heading to his office, and I smiled back like I always did. But inside, I was counting down the hours. When evening came, I told Sarah the plan. She was terrified, but brave. Too brave for her age. "We'll get through this," I whispered. "Just trust me." We set the table for dinner, the same way we always did. I even lit candles, trying to make it look normal. My hands were shaking as I stirred the soup, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Richard came home right on time, flowers in hand, a perfect smile on his face. "How's my lovely wife feeling?" he asked sweetly. "Better," I said, smiling back. "I thought we could have dinner together. Just us." He looked pleased but suspicious. "Of course." "That sounds perfect." As we sat down, the doorbell rang. Richard frowned. "Expecting someone?" I kept my voice calm. "Oh, just a neighbor. Wanted to return a dish." Detective Harris stepped in, dressed casually, introducing himself as Tom from next door. He sat for a moment, chatting about the neighborhood, laughing with ease. Richard relaxed, even offered him a drink, and that's when I saw it, the small vial in Richard's hand as he leaned toward my glass. For a moment, time froze. Every instinct in me screamed. But before we go on, if you're still listening, make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next changed everything. Detective Harris caught my glance, his eyes narrowing. "Mind if I try that wine?" he asked suddenly, reaching for my glass. Richard's hand froze midair. The trap had just been sprung. Richard's hand hovered over the glass, the smile on his face faltering for the first time that night. Detective Harris's calm, friendly expression didn't change, but his voice carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. "Go ahead," he said lightly. "Let me try it. I've always had a soft spot for red wine." Richard laughed, a quick, nervous sound that didn't quite fit. "Oh, no need, it's just for Evelyn. She's been under the weather. I made her something special." "Special?" Harris tilted his head, eyes sharp. "You a wine expert now?" The air thickened. I sat still, my fingers gripping the edge of the table beneath the cloth. Sarah was in the hallway, peeking just enough to see. Richard straightened his posture, that polished charm flickering back into place. "Just trying to take care of my wife, that's all." "Funny," Harris said, his tone soft but cutting, because I couldn't help but notice something floating in that glass. Richard froze. Harris leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Why don't we both step outside for a minute, Mr. Turner? I'm sure you don't mind explaining what's in there." Richard's jaw clenched. His eyes darted toward me, not in guilt but in anger. Pure silent rage. The kind of look that told me if Harris hadn't been there, I wouldn't have lived through the night. Then, just like that, he smiled again. "Of course," he said calmly. "Must be a misunderstanding." They stepped outside onto the porch, their voices low. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Harris asking questions, Richard dodging them, his tone getting sharper by the minute. When they came back inside, Harris gave me a subtle nod. "Everything's fine for now," he said quietly, "but but I think I'll stay for dessert." Richard didn't argue. He sat down, but the confidence he once had was gone. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his napkin. I tried to act normal, but my heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Sarah came in with the plates, setting them down carefully. Her eyes met mine. She knew something big had shifted. Halfway through dinner, Harris received a message on his phone and stood up. "Evelyn, thank you for the meal," he said pleasantly. "By the way, I asked a friend from the department to drop by. Thought it'd be nice to meet your husband." Richard's fork stopped midair. Moments later, a knock echoed through the house. 2 uniformed officers stood at the door. Harris gestured toward them. "Gentlemen, Mr. Turner has something you'll want to take a look at." Richard's mask cracked completely. "You can't prove anything," he snapped. "This is ridiculous." But Harris was already holding up the glass of wine. "We'll see what the lab says," he replied. "And just so you know, Evelyn's been recording everything since this morning." I watched the color drain from Richard's face. He looked at me like a stranger, a cornered animal, angry and desperate. "You set me up," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "You set yourself up." The officers led him away as the front door closed behind them. For a long moment, the house was silent. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Sarah's quiet sobs breaking the stillness. If you're still here, thank you for sticking with me through this. Stories like this remind us that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it hides behind a smile at your own dinner table. But what came next? That was when the real revenge began. It took 3 weeks for everything to unravel. 3 weeks of interviews, statements, and sitting under harsh fluorescent lights, while strangers decided which parts of my life counted as truth. Richard's arrest made the local papers. Respected financial advisor accused of attempted poisoning wife. The photo they used showed him smiling, crisp suit, perfect hair, the man everyone thought they knew. I stared at that picture for hours, wondering how long I'd been living beside a performance. The police said the wine contained traces of a powerful sedative mixed with a toxin, enough to cause a peaceful death if I'd finished my glass. That word haunted me, peaceful. As if my death was supposed to be another one of his tidy solutions. Harris visited once more before the trial. He stood in my living room, hat in hand, the faint scent of rain still clinging to his coat. "You saved yourself," he told me quietly, "but you also saved whoever might have come next." I thanked him, though the words felt small compared to the weight of what he'd done. After he left, the house felt emptier than before. Not just because Richard was gone, but because silence had replaced fear. I could finally breathe again, but every breath came with the ache of what I'd endured. Sarah moved in for a while. The first night, we sat on the couch eating cold pizza, watching a movie we'd seen 100 times. Halfway through, she paused it and turned to me. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for him to walk back through the door?" I swallowed hard. Every night, she nodded. "That's normal. But someday you'll stop checking the locks twice." She was right. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a crime scene. I painted the kitchen, changed the curtains, burned every scent he ever liked, but closure didn't come from paint or candles. It came one morning months later, when I stood in court and looked him in the eyes one last time. He didn't smile this time. His face was pale, thinner, stripped of arrogance. When the judge read the verdict, guilty, he didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, and that was it. No outburst, no final words, just silence. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the world moved on. But for me, time slowed. I realized that justice wasn't the same as peace. Justice was paperwork, signatures, and verdicts. Peace was a process, one I was still learning. That night, I opened a fresh journal. On the first page, I wrote, "Today, I stopped being a victim. Today, I started being me again." Then I took the wine glass from the evidence box, the one the police let me keep after the case closed, and buried it in the garden beneath the oak tree, not out of hate, out of release. Sometimes the only way to heal is to bury the pieces of the life that tried to bury you. When I looked up, the sun was setting. That same amber glow that used to fill our dining room. But this time it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like freedom. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to the fading light, "I forgive you." But I'll never forget. And somewhere deep inside that quiet, I finally heard it, the sound I'd been waiting for all along. Peace. Peace didn't last long. It had been 6 months since Richard's conviction, and the house had finally started to feel like home again. The nightmares had dulled, and Sarah was smiling more. I'd even started volunteering at a local community garden, spending mornings surrounded by soil and sunlight instead of shadows. But one night, that peace cracked. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard the noise, a faint metallic clink near the back door. At first I told myself it was just the wind or a raccoon, but then came another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps across the kitchen tiles. My heart started racing. I reached for the phone, but the line was dead. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the old flashlight from the drawer and crept down the hallway, every step careful, silent. The beam trembled in my hand as I turned the corner, and froze. The back door lock was hanging loose, twisted open from the outside. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. Then from the darkness, a whisper, low and male. "Thought you could get rid of me that easy?" I nearly dropped the flashlight. The voice wasn't Richard's, but it carried his venom. A shadow moved closer, revealing a man I'd never seen before. Tall, in a black hoodie, gloves on, and eyes empty as night. He stepped into the light just enough for me to see the tattoo on his wrist. A small R. Richards initial. He smiled. "He sends his regards." My knees went weak. Even behind bars, Richard had found a way to reach me. The man lunged forward, but I swung the flashlight hard, catching him across the jaw. He stumbled, cursing, and I bolted toward the front of the house, barefoot. Heart pounding. I barely made it to the porch before tripping over the rug and slamming my hand against the alarm button near the door, the one the police had installed after the trial. The siren blared, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The intruder hesitated, then vanished into the night before the lights from the patrol car even turned the corner. The officers searched the area but found nothing, except the twisted lock and a set of muddy boot prints leading toward the woods. When they asked if I had any enemies, I just whispered, "Only one, and he's supposed to be behind bars." The officer looked at me with a knowing expression. "Men like him don't always stay behind bars, ma'am. Sometimes they reach out, through others." That night, I sat by the window until dawn, clutching a cup of cold coffee, waiting for the sky to turn blue. Every sound felt like a threat. Every flicker of light, a warning. Sarah stayed with me the next day, refusing to go to school. She didn't say much, just held my hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Grandma, do you think he's ever really going to stop?" I didn't have the heart to lie. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're still watching this far. It really helps us share more of these stories, and I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? I looked at Sarah, forcing a small smile. "No, sweetheart, he won't stop. But neither will I." Outside, the wind picked up again, and the trees swayed in the fading light. Somewhere in that darkness, I knew Richard was still trying to control me. But he forgot one thing. I was no longer the woman who needed saving. I was the one ready to fight back. The next morning, I didn't call Sarah's school to excuse her absence. I just let her sleep in while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the broken lock, the coffee untouched beside me. Fear had ruled my life for too long. And the more I thought about that man's tattoo, the R burned into his skin, the more I realized Richard hadn't sent a message. He'd sent a promise. So I decided to send one back. I drove to the police station with a notebook full of every strange call, unfamiliar car, and late-night noise I'd noticed in the last month. Officer Harris met me in the lobby. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. But when I told him what happened, his eyes sharpened. "This isn't over," he muttered. "I'll check into prison communications. If Richard's reaching out, we'll find out how." That night, Sarah begged me to leave town. We could go to Aunt Mary's, just for a while. I shook my head. No, honey. Running only works when you're the prey. I'm done being hunted. I installed cameras, changed the locks, and bought a dog from the shelter. A big shepherd mix named Duke, who didn't bark much but never missed a sound. For the first time in weeks, I slept without flinching. But the calm didn't last. 2 nights later, I got a letter. No stamp, just slid under the door. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were only 4 words. You shouldn't have fought. No signature. No name. Just dread. I turned the paper over and saw faint indentations, like someone had written another note before tearing it off. I shaded it with a pencil. The hidden message read, "He knows about Sarah." That's when I felt my blood turn to ice. I called Harris immediately, and within the hour, 2 squad cars were parked outside my home. Sarah was taken to a safe house under police supervision. I wanted to go with her, but Harris insisted, if you leave, we lose the bait. The bait. That was me. That night, I sat in the living room with Duke beside me and the lights dimmed low. Every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. Then 2. Nothing, until I heard it. That same metallic clink. Duke growled, ears pointed toward the hallway. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. The back door creaked open again, slow and deliberate. A figure stepped inside, same height, same build as before, but this time, I didn't wait for him to speak. I flipped the flashlight on and shouted, "Police! Don't move!" He froze, then bolted for the door. But before he could reach it, Duke lunged, knocking him flat onto the floor. Within seconds, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The officers dragged the intruder outside, the same man from before, bruised but alive, and tucked into his pocket they found a letter from Richard. It was short. "Finish the job. There's a bonus if you make it look peaceful." The words hit harder than any blow could. Before we go on, if you've made it this far, make sure to hit subscribe. You won't believe what happens next. And tell me in the comments, how would you feel knowing someone planned your death twice? That night, as they took the man away, I looked at the letter one last time before handing it over as evidence. Richard might have thought he could scare me into silence. But now I had proof, enough to make sure he never breathed free air again. And for the first time, I wasn't scared. I was angry. The kind of anger that doesn't hide. The kind that fights back. I didn't sleep that night, even after the police left. Even after the cameras stopped flashing red across my walls. My mind refused to rest. Richard's letter sat in an evidence bag on my kitchen table, mocking me under the lamplight. Finish the job. The words echoed in my skull until sunrise. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Officer Harris and told him I wanted to visit Richard in prison. He hesitated. "Are you sure, ma'am? That's not a good idea. He's manipulative." "I'm not going there to listen," I said quietly. "I'm going there to end it." The next afternoon, they led me through metal detectors, sterile hallways, and heavy steel doors that clanked shut behind me like the heartbeat of some cold machine. When I reached the visitation room, Richard was already there, sitting on the other side of a thick glass wall, that same smug smile twisting across his face. "Well, if it isn't my favorite widow," he said through the phone, or should I say, almost widow. I didn't flinch. "You failed, Richard, twice." He chuckled, low and steady. "Did I? You're still scared. I can see it in your eyes. That's all I ever needed, to make you remember who you belong to." I leaned closer to the glass. "I don't belong to anyone. Not anymore." For a moment the smile faded. Just a flicker. But it was enough. "I have your letters," I said. "The one you sent your little hitman?" They found it in his pocket. "You're done." His fingers tightened on the phone. "You think the system can stop me? You really haven't learned. People like me don't need freedom to have power." I stared at him, at that smug confidence that had once fooled me into believing I was safe. And then I smiled, not out of fear, but because I finally understood something. "You know what, Richard? You're right. But people like you forget one thing. Power only lasts as long as people are afraid to use theirs." He slammed the phone down, his expression twisting into pure rage. Guards rushed in, dragging him away, shouting orders. But before they turned the corner, he looked back one last time. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll never be safe." I walked out without another word. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with rain. I stood there for a long moment, letting it wash over me. I wasn't shaking anymore. Not from fear, from clarity. Back home, Sarah called the second she heard my voice. "How did it go?" "He's exactly where he belongs," I said. "And soon, he'll never leave." The next day, Harris called with news. "The DA's adding charges. Conspiracy to commit murder. You'll need to testify one more time." I agreed immediately. I wasn't done speaking. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. These stories take you deep, and your support keeps them coming. And tell me, if you were in my place, would you have gone to see him face to face? That night, I opened my front door and stepped into the quiet yard. The air smelled of rain and freedom. Duke rested by the porch, his eyes watching the dark woods like a sentry. I whispered to the night, "Let him try again. I'm ready this time." Because for the first time since it all began, I wasn't running from Richard anymore. I was waiting for him. The trial didn't take long. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down, guilty on all counts: conspiracy, attempted murder, tampering with witnesses. Richard's sentence was extended to life without parole. When the judge read it aloud, he didn't look at me, not once. The man who once controlled every room he walked into now sat hollow-eyed, shackled, and defeated. I thought I'd feel joy. But what I felt instead was quiet, a silence that finally meant safety. After the trial, I and Sarah went to the diner we used to visit before all of this began. She ordered pancakes, extra syrup, like always. Halfway through, she looked up and smiled. "You don't look scared anymore, Grandma." I smiled back. That's because I'm not. For the first time in years, I felt light, free, like I could breathe without waiting for the next shadow to move. That night, when we got home, I poured a glass of wine, not to drown pain but to celebrate survival. I lifted it toward the window, where the moonlight spilled across the floor. "To peace," I whispered. Duke barked softly, tail wagging, as if agreeing. Before I turned in, I glanced at the old oak tree outside, where I'd buried the wine glass months ago. A small patch of wildflowers had grown there. Maybe life knows how to bloom where pain once lived. And to everyone still watching, make sure you're subscribed if you haven't yet. Stories like this remind us, no matter how dark it gets, strength can still rise from the quietest hearts. Because this time, the old lady didn't need saving. She saved herself.